He thought he was just doing his job, just another night shift in a quiet California hospital. But what appeared next was something he couldn't explain. Something older than any living memory, something that shouldn't exist. This is the story of 3i Atlas, and the doctor who faced it. Daniel was a young doctor. Ambitious, dedicated, and cautious. He had seen terrible things before: car crashes, industrial accidents, heart attacks. Death was part of his job, and he had learned to accept it. But nothing in his training could have prepared him for what he was about to encounter. It was a night like any other, or at least, it began that way. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic, of cleaning fluid, of faint metal from the operating rooms. The corridors stretched endlessly, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed quietly, their hum a constant companion to the loneliness that hung in the air. Daniel walked those halls many times before, and they had always seemed familiar, safe. Not tonight. Tonight, they felt alive. The air was heavy. Not just cold, but thick with something unseen, something patient. The kind of presence you can feel brushing against your skin without touching you. He stopped for a moment, a chill crawling up his spine, and shook his head. It was nothing, he told himself. Just fatigue, just the stress of the long hours, nothing more. But even as he walked, the feeling followed him, growing heavier with each step. He had been called to a patient in critical condition. A routine emergency, he told himself. He was ready, as always. His coat hung neatly on his shoulders, the stethoscope heavy around his neck. His hands were steady, his mind focused. He repeated the familiar steps, checked the monitors, assessed the patient, prepare for intervention. It was what he did every day. Until that night, nothing had gone wrong. Until that night, nothing had felt wrong. As he walked past the long corridors, he noticed the silence first. Not the absence of noise, but the absence of life. No footsteps echoing behind him. No voices calling out. Even the faint creak of the building's old pipes seemed to have stopped. The emptiness pressed against him, demanding his attention. And then, out of the corner of his eye, a shadow moved. Just a flicker. A trick of the light. He turned sharply. Nothing. Just the walls, dimly lit, stretching endlessly. His heartbeat quickened. He breathed slowly, telling himself it was nothing. But the feeling of being watched didn't leave him. Daniel's mind began to wander, the way it always did in the quiet hours. He thought of his life outside the hospital, friends, family, the simple comforts of home. He thought about the exhaustion that weighed on his shoulders, the long days and nights, the mental strain that came with saving lives. He tried to focus on the patient he was about to see. He reminded himself that he was a doctor. Logic and science were his allies. Nothing could harm him in a hospital. Nothing, except what was waiting. As he reached the patient's room, he hesitated for a brief second, staring at the door. It was slightly ajar, and through the small crack, a dim light flickered. The faint smell of something metallic, something wrong, drifted out. He shook his head again, forcing himself forward. There was a life to save. This was his duty. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. And the moment he did, the air seemed to change. It grew heavier, colder, suffocating. The light from the hallway barely penetrated the shadows that seemed to twist and cling to the corners of the room. The patient was lying on the bed, barely conscious. Pale, trembling, and strange. There was an unnatural stiffness to their limbs, and the shadows around the body seemed almost aware. Daniel approached carefully, checking monitors, taking vitals, whispering reassurances, and trying to ignore the odd sense that he was not alone. He reached for their wrist. Cold. Colder than it should have been, almost like ice. And then, he heard it. A soft murmur. Almost too quiet to catch. A voice speaking words he couldn't understand. Not English, not anything he recognized. Just, sounds. Ancient, guttural, unnatural. Daniel froze. His rational mind told him it was a hallucination, maybe a reaction to stress, maybe even medication. His instincts screamed at him to pull back. But he was a doctor. He had to stay. He had to help. He leaned closer, straining to hear the words. And then he heard it clearly. Atlas. Atlas, the name slithered through the room, echoing, bouncing off the walls, curling around his mind. It wasn't the patient's voice. It wasn't human. And yet it came from them. Daniel's pulse raced. The lights flickered overhead. A tray rattled in the corner, then fell. Nothing had touched it. The shadows stretched longer, crawling along the walls as though searching for him. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe. This was not normal. This was not a medical emergency. This was something else. Something alive. Something patient. And he was standing right in the middle of it. For the first time in his life, Daniel felt true fear. The kind that seeps into your bones, the kind that paralyzes your mind. He had faced death before, but this was different. This was not an illness. This was not nature. Something beyond understanding had entered his world. And it was watching him. Waiting. Daniel forced himself to focus. He was a doctor. He had a job to do. He would not let fear control him. He checked the monitors, adjusted the four, spoke gently to the patient. He reminded himself that he was in control, that logic and science were still his allies. And yet, the name lingered in the air. Atlas. Atlas. And Daniel knew, with a deep, instinctual certainty, that nothing in this hospital, or anywhere, was going to be ordinary again. That night, everything changed. And that night, 3i Atlas appeared. The corridors of the hospital seemed endless that night, stretching further than Daniel had ever noticed before. Normally familiar hallways now appeared strange, distorted, almost like they were rearranging themselves. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting long shadows that crept along the walls and danced across the linoleum floor. Every shadow seemed to twist, to bend with intention, as if testing him, gauging his fear. The hum of the machines was louder here than usual, almost a growl, vibrating through the floor and walls. It wasn't just sound, it was sensation. The air itself pressed in on him, thick and heavy, cold against his skin. He felt exposed, vulnerable, aware of every heartbeat, every breath. The emptiness of the hospital was oppressive. Every corner might hide something waiting. Something watching. He could almost feel it moving in the shadows just beyond his vision. Daniel approached the patient's room cautiously. His training told him to stay calm, to control his fear, to trust science and reason. But tonight, logic seemed fragile. The air was charged with something he could not name. His fingers tightened around his stethoscope as he pushed the door open slowly, the hinges squealing softly. The room was dimly lit, only the patient's monitor glowing faintly, bathing the walls in a sickly green light. The patient lay there, barely conscious. Pale, trembling, fragile, but there was something wrong beyond illness. Their limbs were rigid in some places, limp in others, moving in ways that made Daniel's stomach twist. Every breath they took seemed labored, unnatural. Their eyes flickered unnervingly, sometimes catching the light, sometimes glowing faintly, almost imperceptibly. And when they moved their lips, the sounds were strange, whispers, hissing, syllables that felt like a language from another time. Daniel took a deep breath, steadying himself. His mind tried to explain it: stress, exhaustion, the pressure of the night shift. But even as he reassured himself, he felt the presence, the heavy, suffocating weight of awareness around him. Something else was in the room. Something unseen, lurking in the corners, circling him, waiting for the right moment. He could feel it, faintly brushing against the back of his neck, tracing down his spine. And every instinct screamed at him to look, to run, but he forced himself to focus. He checked the monitors, adjusted 4 lines, and whispered reassurances to the patient. The words were meaningless, yet necessary, a tether to normalcy in a place that had none. He repeated the vitals, double-checked medications, and even muttered to himself that it was all routine. Routine. Logic. Science. And yet, as he worked, the shadows seemed to pulse and shift. The room itself felt alive, breathing around him. Every corner held a potential threat, every flicker of light a promise of the unknown. The patient's murmurs grew louder. The words were unintelligible, harsh, jagged. Daniel leaned closer, attempting to listen, to discern meaning, to apply logic. And then he heard it, a whisper unmistakable, almost human, almost real, but wrong. The patient's voice, or something using the patient's voice, said one word clearly: Atlas. Daniel froze. His rational mind tried to argue it away. Maybe a hallucination, maybe a symptom, maybe the medication. But his body knew the truth. Every nerve in him screamed, this was something else. He stepped back instinctively, the room suddenly feeling smaller, tighter, oppressive. The monitor flickered erratically. A tray rattled on the counter. Something cold brushed past his arm, though nothing had moved. He looked toward the corners of the room, expecting shadows, but they seemed to bend, to move independently, twisting against the walls and floor in ways that made no sense. Fear, subtle at first, began to gnaw at him, spreading through his chest, squeezing him with an invisible hand. Daniel forced himself to continue. He was a doctor. Logic was his shield. Science was his weapon. He reached for the patient, checked their pulse, and whispered again, reassuring them, but the words felt hollow. The whispers in the room seemed to respond, echoing, overlapping, rising in pitch and intensity. The air grew colder still, each breath a thin mist. The shadows moved closer, stretching toward him, probing, testing his resolve. He felt like prey, caught in a trap he could not see, in a room that had become a labyrinth of dread. Minutes, or hours, passed. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally, dragging each second into a limbo of terror. Daniel couldn't tell if he was moving forward or if the room itself was shifting, rearranging, growing larger or smaller around him. He took a step back and his foot hit nothing, the floor seeming to move beneath him. The patient murmured again, unintelligible syllables that seemed to vibrate through his skull. Atlas. The name repeated itself in his mind now, louder, insistent, haunting. And Daniel realized, with a sinking certainty, that he wasn't just caring for a patient. He was standing in the presence of something alive, something patient, something ancient, and it was aware of him. He tried to focus on vitals, on treatment, on reason. But his thoughts kept returning to the shadows, to the whispers, to the unnatural movements of the patient. Every instinct screamed danger. Every rational thought screamed duty. He was trapped between knowledge and instinct, logic and fear. And the room was watching. Waiting. And Daniel knew, without understanding how, that the night had only just begun. This was no ordinary patient. This was no ordinary night shift. Something had entered the hospital, and it was here, in that room, aware of him, patient, waiting. And Daniel could feel it. He was not alone. Not for a moment. And he would not be safe again. Daniel had been at the bedside for what felt like hours, though time seemed meaningless in that room. The patient's eyes flickered again, glowing faintly in the dim light. At first, he thought it was fatigue, the reflection of the monitors, but no, it was something alive, something aware. Something watching him back. He leaned closer, checking vitals, whispering gently, trying to ground himself in his training. And then he heard it clearly. Words. Words he didn't understand. Harsh, guttural, broken. A language that should not exist. The patient's lips moved, but the sound seemed older than anything human, resonating with a frequency that prickled his bones. And then it said one word, clearly, deliberately, Atlas. Daniel froze. The word echoed through the room, bouncing off walls, filling the corners, pressing against him. His rational mind screamed that it was impossible. There had to be a medical explanation, an auditory hallucination, a side effect of medication. But every instinct in his body screamed danger. He could feel it, the presence behind the word, alive, patient, aware. Something had noticed him, and it was no longer content to remain hidden. Then came the smaller, subtle signs. The tray of instruments rattled in the corner. A monitor beeped rapidly, skipping beats unnaturally. The 4-line twitched as if something unseen had brushed against it. Daniel's pulse jumped. He glanced at the shadows, convinced he had imagined movement, but no. They twisted, stretching toward him, crawling along the walls, curling around the edges of the ceiling, testing him, pressing him, mocking him. A whisper came, soft at first, like air through the vents. He couldn't make out the words, but it was deliberate and personal. It brushed against his mind, coiling through his thoughts, turning his own memories into something unfamiliar. Daniel shook his head, trying to force rational thought, trying to focus on the patient, to remind himself of science, of medicine, of logic. But the whispers only grew louder, circling him, overlapping, pressing harder with each breath. The patient's movements became stranger. Their limbs bent slightly, in ways that should have been impossible. The eyes flickered red, then green, then yellow in an unnatural rhythm, and when they opened their mouth, it wasn't the soft whimpering of fear, it was a voice that wasn't theirs. Low, hollow, resonant, commanding. Leave now. Atlas is here. The words echoed inside Daniel's mind. He could feel the syllables vibrating through his skull. He took a step back. His mind raced, searching desperately for explanations. Could it be some rare neurological condition? Medication reaction? Hallucination? It had to be. And yet, deep down, he knew. He knew the weight in the room, the cold that wasn't temperature, the pressure that wasn't physical, were not signs of illness. This was something else. Something alive. Something patient. The lights flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for brief moments, then flaring back to life. Every flicker revealed shadows twisting differently, moving independently of any natural source. Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his chest. He tried to focus on the monitors, on the patient's vitals, on the 4-line, but every tool, every medical device, seemed suddenly irrelevant, powerless. The room itself had become a trap, a living thing, and he was at its center. The patient's voice, or the entity's voice, grew louder, insistent. It whispered the name again, Atlas. 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 It circled him, teasing, probing. Daniel's rational thoughts began to falter. He could feel fear pooling in his stomach, spreading up his chest, coiling around his mind like a snake. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to continue, to do something, to act as a doctor. But the fear kept rising, thick and oppressive, like the shadows were seeping into his skin. He reached for the patient again, checking vitals, murmuring reassurances that felt hollow. And then he noticed the first marks. Dark, blackish lines, almost like ink, appearing across the patient's forearm. They pulsed slightly, as if alive, writhing under his gaze. Daniel recoiled, his mind spinning. What kind of illness could do this? What could explain this? No answer came. Only the repeating whisper, Atlas. Atlas. And the shadows seemed to lean closer, stretching toward him, testing, daring him. Minutes stretched into eternity. Daniel tried to rationalize, to hold on to sanity, to stay calm. He told himself to breathe, to focus, to trust his skills. But the patient's eyes now glowed brightly, fixed on him, and the whispers filled the room. He felt watched from everywhere at once, a presence that was patient, intelligent, and aware of every twitch, every heartbeat, every thought. Something was studying him. Something was learning him. And he realized, with a cold certainty, that it would not leave him alone. Daniel's vision blurred. Every corner seemed alive. Every shadow stretched unnaturally. Every whisper spoke to him personally, taunting him. The rational explanations, the medicine, the patient's illness, were meaningless here. He had entered a room that was no longer part of the world he knew. Something else existed here. Something old. Something cruel. Something that had been waiting for him. And in that moment, Daniel knew he wasn't just treating a patient. He was witnessing the first signs of something ancient, something supernatural, something called Atlas. Daniel's hands were trembling now, though he tried to hide it. The cold had grown sharper, more invasive, as if the very air had turned solid and pressed against his skin. Every breath burned in his chest, a sharp reminder that he was alive, and utterly exposed. The shadows had grown longer, darker, moving independently across the walls. They slithered, twisted, and coiled as if breathing, creeping closer each time he looked away. He glanced at the patient. Their eyes glowed faintly now, more consistently than before. Each flicker seemed intentional, as if the light inside them pulsed in rhythm with something else, something unseen. The blackish markings along their arms and chest had spread, twisting and writhing, lines crawling like living ink over pale skin. Daniel's rational mind could not comprehend it. There was no disease, no neurological disorder, no explanation that could account for this. Then he heard the whispers again, louder now, almost urgent. They circled the room, overlapping, pressing in on him from every angle. They weren't words, at least, not human words, but they carried meaning, emotion, intent. Fear. Malice. Hunger. He could feel them probing him, testing him, learning him, like a predator studying its prey before the strike. Daniel's stomach twisted. He tried to focus on medical procedures, to ground himself in reality. But the reality around him was slipping, bending, warping. The monitors skipped, erratic. Alarms rang briefly, then fell silent. A tray of surgical instruments lifted slowly from the counter and hovered, spinning gently before crashing to the floor. Daniel's heart raced. His pulse thumped in his ears. He tried to move closer to the patient, to reassure them, to stabilize them, but every step felt like walking through water. The room itself resisted him, pressing in, bending shadows around his path. And then the temperature dropped further, impossibly low. Frost formed along the edges of the bed. Daniel could see his breath curling into the air in front of him. A chill crawled through his body, cold and invasive, sharp like needles. He wrapped his arms around himself instinctively, but it did nothing to stop the sensation of invisible fingers running across his skin, tugging at his hair, brushing his neck. He told himself it was his mind, exhaustion, stress, but he knew better. Something was here. Something aware. Something patient. The patient began to convulse. Not violently, but unnaturally, with a rigidity and fluidity that made no sense. Their limbs twisted and bent as though under the control of an outside force. The glowing of their eyes intensified, burning red for a heartbeat, then green, then yellow, as if responding to some rhythm Daniel couldn't understand. And the markings on their arms writhed in time with the pulsing light of their eyes, as if alive. Daniel's hands shook violently as he reached for the stethoscope, anything that could ground him in reality. He whispered reassurances, soft, shaky words meant to calm, to tether, to resist the overwhelming dread. But the whispers from the room only grew louder, closer. He could feel them pressing on his mind, crawling into his thoughts, turning his memories, twisting his perception. Every corner of the room seemed alive, moving independently, stretching, bending, anticipating his gaze. And he realized with horror that the room itself was no longer neutral, whatever had entered here had taken it over. Then came the first sensation of being touched, not by hands, but by intent. Cold, heavy, pressing into his chest, forcing him to his knees for a fraction of a second. Daniel gasped, scrambling back instinctively. His rational mind fought him, telling him he was imagining it, telling him to breathe, telling him to focus. But the sensation was undeniable. Something unseen had just made contact. And the patient's eyes, those glowing, pulsing eyes, seemed to reflect the same intent, like a mirror showing him the consciousness behind the darkness. Daniel staggered backward, heart hammering, trying to find a foothold in reality. Every rational explanation failed. Exhaustion, hallucination, delirium, stress, none of it could account for the shadows moving, the whispers, the cold, the patient's twisting limbs, or the living markings. Something else was here. Something alive, patient, aware. And it was watching him. Testing him. Learning him. He reached for the phone, the emergency line, anything that might call for help. But the line was dead. Static buzzed in his ears. The shadows leaned closer, pressing toward him, coiling like smoke around his arms, around his legs, around his very mind. His pulse raced uncontrollably. The room seemed smaller now, the walls stretching inward, the shadows moving independently, tightening, pressing, anticipating his panic. And through it all, he could hear the word again, repeated endlessly, Atlas. 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 Daniel forced himself to focus. He had to keep moving, to stay alive, to think. His hands shook as he tried to check the patient's vitals again. The markings writhed, pulsing in time with the glowing of the eyes. The whispers surrounded him, growing louder, overlapping, carrying an intent, a promise he could not escape. Every instinct screamed to flee, to abandon his duty. But he couldn't. He was a doctor. He had to try. He had to hold on. Minutes stretched into hours. Daniel could not tell how long he had been trapped in that room, caught between fear and duty. The shadows continued to move, the cold to press in, the whispers to invade. The patient's eyes glowed steadily now, burning into his soul. And Daniel understood something he had not dared to imagine: this was no ordinary emergency. This was a presence, ancient and cruel, testing him, shaping the room, shaping reality itself around him. And he was in the middle of it, powerless, terrified, utterly alone. He whispered to himself, to the patient, to the empty room, "Stay with me. I can help. I will save you." But the words felt hollow. The dread pressed harder. The shadows twisted, the cold penetrated deeper, and the whispers grew into a chorus, all repeating one word with endless insistence: Atlas. 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 And Daniel realized with bone-deep certainty that nothing he had ever known could prepare him for what was coming. Whatever had entered the hospital was alive. Whatever was here was patient. And whatever it was, it had chosen him. And then, Daniel saw it. He couldn't mistake it. The shadows shifted and warped violently, coiling and twisting until they condensed into a figure. Taller than any human, impossibly elongated, limbs bending at angles that should have been impossible, it emerged from the darkness like a living nightmare. Its skin was blacker than the absence of light itself, absorbing the flickering bulbs, the monitor's glow, the very essence of the room around it. And its eyes, red, fierce, glowing, locked onto Daniel as if it could pierce his very thoughts. Daniel's breath caught. His rational mind screamed, his body froze, but he could not look away. The presence radiated a coldness so deep it seemed to seep into his bones. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to abandon the room. But his eyes were fixed. The figure moved with impossible grace, gliding above the floor as if weightless, its limbs twisting like shadows in motion. Walls seemed to bend around it, doors warped as it passed through them without resistance. And Daniel realized, this was no hallucination. This was alive. And it had come for him. The patient convulsed violently, arching in impossible angles. The markings along their body writhed and pulsed in time with the glowing in their eyes, and then, suddenly, their mouth opened, and it was not their voice that emerged. Deep, resonant, hollow, commanding, "Daniel, you should not have come." The words echoed in the room, but also in his head. Vibrating through him. Occupying every corner of his consciousness. And Daniel understood, the presence was not merely in the room. It was inside him. Daniel staggered back, nearly tripping over the floor stand. The shadows shifted, forming tendrils, creeping along the floor toward him. The lights flickered violently, exploding in bursts, plunging him into darkness before flaring again. Each time, the demon seemed closer. Its glowing eyes burned into him, unblinking, unrelenting. The very air pulsed with malevolence. Daniel's heart raced, chest tight, fingers trembling on the edge of paralysis. Rational thought fled. There was no logic here. No escape through reason. The whispers returned, louder now, merging with the resonant voice that seemed to flow from the figure itself. Atlas. 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 The words were not threats, they were declarations, demands, commands. They carried intent. Desire. Hunger. Daniel felt them clawing into his mind, reshaping his perception, twisting his thoughts, filling his chest with terror so absolute it threatened to crush him. And then, he realized the worst truth: this presence, this three-eyed Atlas, knew him. It had watched him. It had waited. And it was patient. The figure stretched and moved again. Its limbs bent through walls, through floors, through space in ways that made his stomach churn. Daniel's gaze followed it helplessly. Every corner of the room seemed alive now, stretching, darkening, reshaping to accommodate it. He realized that the hospital, the patient, the very air, they were all part of its domain. And he was intruding. He tried to speak, to call for help, but his voice trembled and failed him. The patient's body convulsed again, responding to the entity as though it were a puppet on invisible strings. The markings pulsed violently, glowing faintly with each contraction. Daniel's skin prickled, his hair stood on end. He could feel the cold emanating from 3i Atlas, a force that seemed to occupy the entire room at once. Fear had become physical, heavy, crushing him from the inside out. And then it moved closer. Gliding, silent, deliberate. Its glowing eyes never left him, and Daniel realized that there was no place in the room to hide, no angle that was safe. The presence seemed to expand, filling the space, pressing against his mind, forcing him to acknowledge it. It was patient. It was aware. And it was testing him. Daniel's rational mind scrambled. Science, logic, training, all meaningless here. Nothing could explain the bending of walls, the living markings, the glowing eyes, the whispers, the impossible movements. And worse, he felt the entity's intent pressing into him, cold and heavy, like invisible hands gripping his chest, reading his thoughts, calculating his fear. It was alive. It was aware. And it had him in its focus. He stumbled backward, his vision blurring, his ears ringing, and the figure moved again. It didn't walk. It glided, it flowed, it occupied space in ways that defied physics. The patient's body twisted violently under its influence, eyes burning, markings pulsing, whispering the name, Atlas. Daniel felt a deep, bone-deep certainty that this name, this presence, was older than time, crueler than anything human. And it had chosen this night, this room, and him. And in that moment, Daniel understood something essential and terrifying. He was no longer merely observing. He was a participant. Trapped. Targeted. Tested. The figure's presence pressed harder, colder, heavier, and every instinct screamed escape. Yet he could not move. Fear had rooted him to the spot, and still, 3i Atlas loomed, patient, aware, waiting. Waiting for what, he did not know. But he knew that it would not let him leave unchanged. For minutes, or hours, he stood frozen, caught in the gaze of a being that should not exist. Every rational thought fled, replaced by primal terror. Every heartbeat echoed in his ears. Every breath burned. And the room, the shadows, the patient, all had become an extension of 3i Atlas, a stage for its patience, its awareness, its malice. And Daniel knew, with a clarity that terrified him more than the sight itself, he had seen only the beginning. This was the first full glimpse of 3i Atlas. The rest, he realized, would test him in ways he could not yet imagine. And the name, repeated endlessly in whispers, would haunt him long after this night. Daniel's chest heaved. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to run, but his feet felt glued to the floor. The room had grown darker, heavier, almost suffocating. Shadows twisted around him like living tendrils, curling around his arms and legs, pressing into him, teasing him, daring him to move. He could feel the presence of 3i Atlas all around him, pressing into his mind, whispering, clawing, judging. He stumbled toward the patient, desperate to stabilize them, to regain some control. But the markings writhed violently under his touch. The glowing eyes flared red, and the patient convulsed unnaturally, their body twisting in impossible angles. Every instinct told him to let go, to escape, but he could not. He was trapped between his duty and his terror, a mortal caught in the attention of something ancient and cruel. He reached for the phone to call for help. The line was dead. Static hissed through the receiver, but no one answered. He banged on the buttons, tried to redial, but the presence seemed to mock him. His fingers shook. The shadows leaned closer, pressing him toward the wall, curling like smoke, thickening like living ink. The cold intensified, ice crawling into his bones. Daniel realized he was not simply in a room, he was inside the domain of 3i Atlas, a space warped by its awareness, controlled by its patience. The whispers grew louder, merging into one chorus, overlapping and echoing in his mind. Not words, intent. Malice. Hunger. They scraped against his thoughts, twisting his memories, turning logic into panic, rationality into terror. And then he felt it, pressure on his chest. Invisible hands squeezing, pressing, trying to crush his breath out. He gasped, staggered backward, clutching his chest, every breath sharp and painful. He knew he had to act. Desperation fueled his movements. He grabbed the oxygen mask from the table and threw it at the patient, hoping to disrupt the entity's control, to interfere, to do anything. The mask hovered for a moment, then was ripped away as if some invisible hand threw it back. He tried shouting, screaming, pleading, commanding, but his voice felt trapped, swallowed by the presence surrounding him. And still, the patient convulsed violently, controlled, responding to the entity in ways that made Daniel's stomach twist with fear. He stumbled back to the doorway, intent on fleeing. But the figure, 3i Atlas, moved impossibly fast. It glided toward him, liminal, bending the space around it, limbs twisting unnaturally, eyes glowing brighter. The room seemed to shrink, walls bending, shadows coiling like snakes around him, pressing closer. Daniel could feel its gaze inside his head, probing, testing, daring him to break. The whispers grew into a scream inside his skull, Atlas. 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 And then a fleeting memory flashed, a fragment of something he had read, a ritual, a prayer whispered long ago, faint, almost forgotten. Shaking violently, he murmured the words aloud, hoping, praying, not even fully believing. For a brief instant, the shadows recoiled. The glowing eyes in the patient dimmed slightly. The cold eased just enough for him to take a trembling breath. It was all he needed. Daniel bolted. His feet pounded against the floor, heart hammering, lungs burning, every step a battle against the invisible pressure that tried to hold him back. The shadows twisted, coiling after him, stretching, reaching, but he ran, fueled by terror and desperation. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, then exploded in small bursts, throwing the hall into darkness, only to flare back to life and reveal that he was alone, or at least, apparently alone. But he knew better. 3i Atlas had not released him. It had only withdrawn, patient, waiting, calculating. He reached the main hall, gasping, knees buckling. The night staff found him collapsed, pale, shaking, barely able to speak. The patient was gone. Vanished. The bed was empty. The monitors showed nothing but silence. Daniel's mind tried to process what had happened, but he could not. Rational thought refused to return. And in the deepest part of his being, he knew the truth, 3i Atlas had not left. It had only retreated. Waiting. Patient. Watching. For hours after, he could feel it in his mind. Every flicker of light, every shadow in the hallway, every whisper of whine through the building reminded him. It had left a mark, a presence that he could not shake, a dread that would follow him forever. The hospital was silent again, superficially calm. But Daniel knew better. Somewhere in the darkness, Three-Eye Atlas waited. And the patient had been claimed, or perhaps transformed, or worse. He did not know. All he knew was that he had barely escaped with his life. And even as he tried to calm himself, even as he tried to convince himself that the nightmare had ended, he felt it, the invisible gaze, the patient still missing, and the eternal whisper of one name. Atlas. It would not let him rest. It would not let him forget. And he understood, with a horror he could not articulate, that the night, and Three-Eye Atlas, were far from over. The hospital slowly returned to its routine. Or at least, it seemed to. The corridors no longer groaned with shifting shadows, the monitors no longer flickered violently, the cold had receded, or perhaps Daniel's senses had grown numb. But he knew better. Something had changed. The air itself felt different now, heavier, like a warning he could not ignore. The staff whispered among themselves about strange occurrences, but no one could see what he had witnessed. No one could feel the suffocating presence that had lingered, patient, in every corner of the hospital. Daniel returned to his duties, but he was not the same. The confident, methodical doctor that had walked these halls weeks before had been replaced by a haunted man, sleep-deprived, jittery, and hyper-aware. Every flicker of light, every whisper of wind, every shadow in the corner of his eye set his heart racing. He began to question everything, his senses, his sanity, even the boundaries of reality itself. He could not forget the glowing eyes, the writhing markings, the way the shadows had moved. And above all, he could not forget the name, Atlas. He spent nights awake, pacing his apartment, replaying every moment over and over in his mind. Every movement of the patient, every twist of the shadows, every whisper of that name haunted him relentlessly. He read ancient texts, medical journals, folklore, anything that might explain what had happened. But no explanation could encompass what he had witnessed. The rational mind failed him. And with each passing day, he felt the presence of Three-Eye Atlas lingering just beyond perception, patient, waiting. Other hospital staff noticed the change. Daniel no longer interacted normally. His colleagues whispered about him. They said he seemed withdrawn, anxious, haunted. He avoided certain rooms, certain hallways, certain patients. He could not explain why, for any attempt at explanation would betray the truth. He had seen something no one else had seen, something no one should ever see. And it had left its mark. The patient was gone. Some said they had died. Others said they had vanished entirely, without a trace. And Daniel knew that whatever had claimed them, whatever had controlled them, had done so deliberately, with intent, and with patience. The bed was empty now, the monitors quiet, the 4 lines slack. But in his mind, the image remained, glowing eyes, writhing markings, the presence behind the name Atlas. He tried to live a normal life. He ate, he slept, he worked, but always with a sense of dread lurking just beneath the surface. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every faint sound in the quiet of the night reminded him. It was watching. Always watching. He could feel its patience, its awareness, its intent pressing in on him even when he was alone. The hospital had become a memory of terror, but Three-Eye Atlas had left a part of itself in his mind, an unshakable reminder that what he had faced was alive, intelligent, and patient. At times, in the quiet hours, he would hear whispers. Not the words of the patient, not the alarms of the hospital, but something else. The name. Atlas. Soft, insistent, curling into his thoughts like smoke. And he would feel the cold, creeping along his spine, pressing at his chest, reminding him that he had not survived unscathed. Something had followed him, something eternal, something patient. And Daniel realized, with a terror that no amount of logic could alleviate, that he might never escape it. He tried to warn others, tried to explain the unexplainable. But who would believe him? Doctors, staff, colleagues, they would dismiss him, call it stress, fatigue, trauma. And perhaps that was what 3i Atlas wanted, for its presence to be denied, ignored, yet always felt. To exist in the spaces between reality and perception, patient, eternal, waiting for the next witness. Daniel knew that one day, it would return, or perhaps it had never truly left. It was always there, in the shadows, in the cold, in the whispers. And Daniel, haunted, sleep-deprived, obsessed, realized a terrifying truth: that night, that encounter, had changed him forever. He could never return to who he was before. Every corridor he walked, every shadow he passed, every whisper he heard reminded him that 3i Atlas was patient, it was aware, and it was waiting. Waiting for the next moment, the next person, the next soul to notice. And somewhere, in the darkness, it still waits. No one knows what 3i Atlas truly wants. No one can say why it chooses its victims, or what it seeks. But one thing is certain: it waits. Patient, aware, eternal. And perhaps it is already watching you. If you want to hear more stories that will chill you to the bone and keep you awake at night, subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next, because the darkness is only getting deeper.